Welcome to the AI Critical Literacy Podcast, episode 5 of season 2. My name is Jared Schroeder. I'm an AI Teaching and Innovation Fellow for the University of Missouri Teaching for Learning Center, and also an associate professor at the Missouri School of Journalism. This episode is I couldn't decide on a catchy name, actually. I've got two. It's either the cheat bait episode, which is a term I coined while I was reading, reading the chapter related to this episode, or the Lost Horizons episode, which is a reference to a Jim Blossom song for the 90s, though this episode is not about the Jim Blossom song, but it's a good song. So I hope you enjoy this episode. So I was reading about the most common complaints from students. I was looking for a list of the worst experiences college students had, like worst instructors, like why were they the worst? Worst classroom policies, worst grading policies, worst assignments, just looking this up for this episode. And I was trying to think to myself, what was my worst experience in a college class? And I went to college for 10 years. For 3 degrees, to be honest. It wasn't the same degree for 10 years. But I think the funniest one was when I somehow ended up in an advanced Spanish class. And the professor at the beginning of class said in English, "We will only speak in Spanish in this class from now on. No one, if you need to go to the bathroom, whatever, you have a question, has to be in Spanish. All speaking has to be in Spanish." Well, I'd never taken basic Spanish, and so I didn't know Spanish. And so I raised my hand, or I tried to tell him, I was like, "Hey, I think I'm in the wrong class." And he was like, "In Spanish, in Español, and I'm like, No. I don't know Spanish. That's why I'm in the wrong class." He's like, "Again, you must speak in Spanish." So, that's kind of a funny, eventually I dropped that class because how did I even get in there in the first place? I don't know. Advising, yeah, that was a problem. But what are some other things, real problems that students point out? One bucket of things I saw was just arbitrary grading policies. Policies where instructors just got in front of the class day one, are like, "Hey, no one's going to get an A in this class." Or my grades were too high last semester, so I'm going to purposely deflate your grades. That kind of thing. Students really did not react well to that type of approach. Another bucket was really strange classroom policies. One student explained how a professor said that no student could get up and go to the bathroom during class. They had to hold it because they were, quote, adults. That kind of policy, students did not react well to that kind of policy. A third bucket of complaints I saw was about just meaningless assignments. One person told a story about how the instructor just had them open up a workbook and do workbook pages in class, and the instructor didn't engage with the class. They didn't instruct. They just kind of sat and did their own thing while the students worked in the room. All these complaints kind of just raised questions. And I ignored the dumb ones. I shouldn't say dumb. I ignored the ones that I don't think really contribute to the discourse, right? Kind of like when I read my own evaluations, there's comments that students provide. I'm like, "That's a really good thought. I wish I had thought about that." And I have over the years incorporated their feedback. There's other times of feedback I'm just like, "Yeah, I'm just going to discount this one because I don't think it's serious." I had one year, I had a student who complained that my electronics policy, that I needed to have one because she couldn't control her electronics policy, or she wanted me to create a policy to keep her off her electronics during class. And I was like, "No, I'm not going to do that." And I had another one who just last semester complained because I offer students just a tiny bit of extra credit for coming to class, just to encourage them. I don't want to penalize them. I don't want to be an attendance lawyer. So I'm just like, if you come, you benefit. Here's a little bit. But the student complained in the evaluation that she was really frustrated she had to come to class to get those points. And I'm just like, I'm going to ignore that comment. That's not contributing to making my class better. So anyway, why am I talking about this? That's always the question, right? At least I feel like this opening's more related than usual. I'm not talking about a movie or something. This episode 5 of the Teaching for Learning Center's AI Critical Literacy Podcast, episode 5 of season 2, covers one of the final chapters in the book, The Opposite of Cheating, the book we've looked at all season, which has been so focused on assessment. And this chapter 6 that we're looking at and talking about today, is protecting assessment integrity. And the reason I bring up these complaints to start out the episode is because oftentimes, and I'm in the classroom myself all the time, oftentimes instructors kind of lose the focus on the why are we here, what are we trying to accomplish focus, the learning objective, the outcome focus of what does this class need to accomplish. And this episode is very much about thinking about that within the context of AI as a kind of a catalyst to make us think about that. AI as a tool forcing us to review our assessments. But if we're going to review our assessments, maybe we need to review our learning objectives. And so that's what this episode is about. As usual, I mean, to surprise to no one, I have the perfect guest for this episode. My guest is Jonathan Cisco, who is the University of Missouri Director of Educational Assessment. So he is someone who has thought, and you'll see from our conversation, has thought so much about this connection between, I should say, learning objectives, assessment, and then the influence of AI and other technologies on this process. This process that we need to be thinking about on the classroom level, but also bigger on the programmatic level, and even bigger on the the college and university level. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Here's my conversation with Jonathan.
I'm Jonathan Cisco. I'm Director of Educational Assessment at the University of Missouri, which just means I work with faculty all across the disciplines with things like alignment. So what are our program outcomes? How do those relate to what we're trying to teach in our courses? And then how does that dictate what activities and assessments we have if we're doing it properly? So last year we were doing stuff with our regional accrediting bodies, so accrediting the entire university. And now we are really putting the stuff that we've established through the program review process. So every program goes through this big review, and now the actual assessment of student learning is part of that program review. So that's what I do. Currently writing a book with Johns Hopkins on assessment, and currently titled Assessment Demystified, and hopefully that title gets going. This is a fun question. First use of AI. I started really early when ChatGPT was kind of released to the public. And I think my first real prompt was to write a sonnet about our pet dog. I think that may have been it. And it was so fun, right? And then I got my kids involved because we were talking about poetry and sonnets, and so we would pitch out 3 different things. So dog, coffee, and I don't know, iPad or something like that. And it would write this decent sonnet using those elements. Since then, though, I really started going into education. So I was actually hired by some school districts to teach their teachers about AI, which is at that time was the easiest thing to teach in the world, because it was just look at what this can do and then get them brainstorming. But personally, there early on, I started thinking about the capability of just personal learning. So can I speak to historical figures? So yeah, you can. And I upload the Federalist Papers, say, and engage with that stuff. Or could I speak with my favorite fictional characters? And so I had found kind of that out of copyright copy of Brothers Karamazov, which is one of my favorite books, and was having a conversation with Alyosha, my favorite character. And that is a fantastic use that I think is really underused with AI. So stuff like that, there's a zillion others, but I kind of got on the train of, yes, this is scary, but also, wow, it's exciting for teaching and learning.
I mean, one of the reasons we're talking is your role with assessment. That's kind of the theme of this season of the podcast is, I mean, in my own personal journey of trying to figure out how to do assessment. And these authors are addressing that in the book we're reading. And one of the things they're talking about is the idea that authors, I created this term, I think, when I was getting ready for the podcast, but this idea that they often create assignments that are basically just cheap bait, right? That they create assignments that they're not going to be quality assessments, because students can use AI in a way that makes it where the learning has never actually happened that they're trying to assess. I want to ask you what the most problematic types of assessments that you've seen are in this kind of era we're in now. Are the same problems still there, or is it a set of new problems that you're facing?
That's good. I think the same problems are still there. It's just accelerated. And so, when I first got into teaching and learning stuff, I was working with writing in the disciplines. So it was like the importance of writing in mathematics, the importance of writing in chemistry, not just kind of the historically kind of writing disciplines in the humanities. And I mean, even then, when plagiarism was the big bugaboo, right? This is what we were talking about, and oftentimes the conversation would be we would try to get educators to shift to the idea of students as enemies and think instead of like, why are they cheating?
Mm-hmm.
What's the deal? Is it because we are asking them to do too much? If I have my 8-year-old start doing calculus, that's not cool. He's gonna cheat. He's gonna find a way. And then how? So more specifically to your question, things like generalized, let's call them beige writing prompts. They're just okay, fine. It's not terribly engaging, and I do think that those kinds of things can be easily mitigated. And then the authors, of course, talk about this kind of using the same assessments over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're encouraging that temptation of students just doing a quick Google and then finding that assessment. I think it's very dangerous to start with the assumption that somehow that student that did that is bad. It's like, well, maybe they made a bad choice, sure, but let's kind of humble ourselves a wee bit as educators and ask why.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they doing that? So I think that we have to always be thinking about the why our students are doing that rather than going after any one kind of assessment. So more specifically, when you ask an assessment person about course assessments, so by that, exams, quizzes, that kind of stuff, nothing is off the table for me, whether AI is involved or not, because my response is always going to be, well, what are you trying to achieve? What's the skill we're trying to teach? And I'm looking at that from a program perspective. What is the program at the end of the day? What kind of skills should students have at the end of the program? But it's the same thing with the course. It's like, well, what kind of assessment type should I use to avoid AI? My response is, well, what are the skills that you're trying to teach? Have you thought about it? You may not have. And maybe the skills you're teaching, so your course objectives, maybe those haven't changed for years, or maybe you never had them in the first place. You never really took them seriously. All of these things I hear all the time, right? I ask my fellow educators to just humbly, honestly think about what are the skills that you could teach them that are going to ultimately help them. And then and only then do you start thinking about, well, how am I going to assess those skills? I like to say, build a house starting with the roof. And that would be like the equivalent of, I'm going to teach it, so I'm going to go after my assessments. No, that's horrible. Don't do that. You've got it topsy-turvy. What's the foundational element of your course? Those are the skills, your course objectives. And then you'd ultimately get to the roof.
And so you just touched on two things. One is, and the authors point this out too, yeah, we can say the students are cheating and we can chase after them. And I've definitely tried to push away from that too. I mean, part of it's just pragmatism, just trying to be pragmatic about it, right? Like, that's I can't control their activity, their decision making. There's things I could do, and this book has talked about, other chapters have talked about things we can do to make it less likely to disincentivize through almost relationship and trust and things like that. But I know I can control my side of the assessment, right? And so I can adjust it to make it to where it's just what the authors called in this chapter, like raising the price of cheating, basically make it more difficult. But anyway, the other thing you were talking about is just probably sounds like it's never changed, right? AI hasn't made it to where you have to know what you want to accomplish before you assess what you're trying to accomplish. That's not new probably to your job. What's new is that, this might be incorrect, but like what's new is that AI is forcing us to address it in ways that we haven't. Like, it was fine to just get by with the old ways of doing it until now. And now it's like a catalyst. It's forcing us to reassess how we assess. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it used to be the elephant in the room. Maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, when I was doing stuff, people would, out themselves as nerds, and we would talk about AI, but usually it was in the background. And now, of course, it's everywhere, which I think is good. I think there are kind of first principles of alignment and assessment, as you mentioned, that we should always focus on. But yes, the use of AI as a catalyst, and there are, I think, some very justified critiques of higher education those of us in higher ed should be ready to respond to,
Mm-hmm.
using the same language. And I think, higher ed in general is kind of like trying to navigate a huge ship with a little bitty rudder.
Yeah.
It's so slow, which I think historically has probably been a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to responding to AI, and in our country with the amount of students, the amount of money that students are paying for these kinds of educations, we owe it to them to articulate the relevance of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
We can't do that without engaging with the topic of AI and when it works and when it's a hindrance.
Yeah. And the authors basically came up with 3 options that the instructors can do. They can either have students complete assessments in a controlled environment, right? Like I think I just did that in my class with a pen and paper test, which has been a nightmare. 2, design assessments that Gen AI can't do. Or 3, rethink the learning objectives and redesign the assessment to allow students to offload parts of what used to be unoffloadable things. Does that seem like a complete list to you? I mean, and maybe it's the journalist in me, I read critically and think, well, is that the right list? It's a list. It's a good list. But is there something missing? Is there something that could be added to it?
Yeah. So, I'm thinking, okay, having students complete the assessments in a controlled environment. Right. Okay, it's an arms race, I think, in some ways, like what the authors talk about. I think I'm very skeptical. Like if we could do a Faraday, is that what's called a Faraday cage? To where, if you ever seen movies, like I think they do this for V for Vendetta or something, they have some sort of thing and they'll put it in the room, press the thing, and then it creates this zone where internet or self signals or whatever cannot get in or out. That would be cool.
Mm-hmm.
I've looked into it, actually. It's very expensive, but that would be cool. Design assessments that Gen AI can't do. Sure, that's a thing. Yeah, we could talk more about, what are the skills that we want our students to be able to do without the use of AI. Sure. Rethink learning objectives. Yeah, of course. That would be the big one, I think, and something that I think is where in higher ed woefully inadequate. But I also do think that there's room for thinking about the kinds of assessments that AI can help us with. I have not heard this a lot, including in this book. So I'm giving an example. I'm a big fan of the oral examination and all of its variants, right? The authors do mention that might be a cool thing to do. Great. There's a reason why we ask doctoral students to not just write a dissertation, but to present that dissertation. Good. Then I don't know if I read it in this book or another book of talking about, I think it was this book, a strategy of having students write something and then have a little presentation, like something short, 5-10 minutes, something like that. Good. Now, I also think, though, that imagine a world where we could kind of flip the use of AI on its head and be as a strong support entity. So we know oral examinations, in other words, is a great way of assessing the degree to which a student has learned something. Why don't we do that? Why isn't that a thing? Because it's expensive. It's resource heavy, right? It's going to require a disciplinary expert to sit there and listen to who knows how many student presentations. They're going to get tired. They don't want to do it. But that's something that could be kind of partnered with AI, if you will, as at least a preliminary filter. So let's say we've assigned this, we've customized an AI agent to listen to a student present, and would at least help us kind of get through that initial hoop of lacking resources in order to do an assessment type that we know works really well. These are the kinds of conversations that I think are kind of really pushing the boundaries. And so I don't have a plan on how all of that would work, but I do know the capability is there. If you've ever played, and I would encourage your listeners to think about if you've ever played with advanced voice through ChatGPT. This is actually my favorite use of AI. So that's where you're having a back and forth with an AI agent, to talk about whatever you'd like. I've had many a long car rides speaking about literature or some random thing that I'm learning at the time. As I'm driving with an AI agent speaking to me back and forth, I'm interrupting. It's like a conversation we're having here. Is it spooky? Sometimes it is. It's a little spooky. But imagine kind of harnessing that so that we could take advantage of these powerful assessment types like an oral examination, albeit just very expensive. I think there's something there, Jared, that we could do. So I would add that to that list of exploring this other dimension.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So fourth item, because I was thinking these three items, I basically have, they're almost like stages of grief for me right now, because like I've gone through all three of these basically this summer with my big, large lecture required class, a communication law class. Like I decided, first of all, last spring, I tried to make my tests. They were all on Canvas, open note. I want my students to have the notes. I want them to engage with their ideas. I don't want them to memorize. I want them to apply. And so I was always like, hey, take the test wherever you want. Use your notes. It's timed. Blah, blah, blah. It's fine. I don't want to treat you like you're, a prisoner or, and that worked great. And the students really liked it. But I was deciding that they were basically just using AI to take the test. And I tried over and over to make the test unAIable, right? Like I tried to keep the old situation, but try to make a test that AI, so basically part two, design assessment that Gen AI can't do. I decided I couldn't win that battle anymore. I spent 3 months this summer thinking about what am I going to do with my assessments. And I end up going, I guess, to three and saying, well, can I rethink my objectives and redesign? Like, is what I'm trying to teach them? Should I just be like, that's fine, go ahead, use AI? I came to the conclusion that I really need my students to have a baseline of information in this area in order to function. Like you can't even use AI well if you don't know enough about what you're asking it. You need to ask prompts. You need to be able to evaluate, and if they're going to be journalists, they need to be able to have factual information. And so I went from three up to one and basically said I had to have students complete the assessment in a controlled environment, which for me was a pen and paper test, which has been a time nightmare. I'm going to have to think of something else. We just did test one. We're going to have to make an adjustment for test two. My TA is, I'm just going to find him laying around somewhere at some point. He's just going to expire basically. So yeah, I mean, I think all of us kind of have to go through it. We could almost act like this is a checklist in some ways if we rephrased it a little and be like, maybe move three up to the beginning and be like, okay, what do you want to accomplish? Like you were talking about earlier. Okay. Step two might be what you suggested. Is there an AI tool that should be incorporated with this, or would that be a problem? Step three, okay, maybe that the answer to step two is no. So, okay, step three is, do you want to use a controlled environment, or do you want to try to create an assignment that AI can't take? And then you would split into that. I'm just trying to think, because I think every instructor basically has to go through something like this with their assessments right now. Like it's like a responsibility. Like we all have to do this. Like I had a stack of 215 exams on my desk, like all this paper. It felt so dumb. And I was just like, thanks, AI. Thanks a lot. Like that's what I said to I handed in my TA in this like 20-pound bag. Like I just robbed a bank, like a duffel bag. And I'm just like, thanks, AI. I didn't want this. No one wanted this.
That's just awful. Yeah, I can, it makes me think about how the reality is nobody knows. And so I was speaking to my wife this morning, is that I feel like I should preface absolutely everything I say with a italicized in bold, I think, because I think we're in a really weird medium place of trying to navigate this. I mean, there are some skills of like assessing a lot more, rather well, and instead of having huge summative assessments. Right. And it's just difficult to give general advice because it's so discipline specific. And then I go back to, I agree with you that third should go number one of re-looking at your learning objectives. And so I think we're in this medium place, and it's difficult because where I think we should absolutely go, and it just takes time, is thinking seriously about industry. What skills does our industry need? And again, it's going to take a little bit of time to figure that out. I fully recognize that. but if we don't start there, then we're always trying to play catch up with this. So it's like, what does a journalist need right now? Are journalists using in your area? Are they using AI, or are they for their writing? Are they using it for their research? Is there a cultural shift of not using it at all because of what it represents? I don't know. What do you hear
Yeah, I
from your
mean, the
colleagues
answer
in the
is, the
field?
problem is the answer is yes, right? Like, to all, you're like, the industry hasn't decided what it wants yet, right? And so I think that's probably true
Yeah.
with, I think, like engineering and business, maybe they've started to get a little farther down the road, automating tasks that used to be done by humans. But in other, maybe the humanities, maybe in journalism, maybe in the communication, other communication fields, they're still trying to figure out what the best like there's no set of practices or guidelines that have been accepted
Mm.
across the industry. So, but I mean, just I don't want to spend too much time on the school of journalism, but like the Missouri School of Journalism should be leading, right? And so that's one of my
Yeah.
arguments when they put me in position to to advise the school, is just basically like, we should do our best to lead. We don't have to wait and for everybody to figure it out. Let's use what we know and the power we have in this building to try to lead the field a little bit. So that's something to think about across campus. If you really have
Yeah.
strengths in an area, there's a lot of really great expertise around campus that we could actually help our industry figure out what they're supposed to be doing. Partnering with
Yeah.
them, like we could be partnering, like maybe faculty should we should do some externships or whatever they're called now. Like go into the industry, go talk to them. We're having about 30 journalists come to campus next month to tell us how their industry is using AI. And like that's a really
Oh,
good way to do that.
perfect.
And we're going to take notes and then incorporate that into our strategic plan. But
That's huge. I mean, it's like that I think it's not no longer an option. And I relate that specifically from the U.S. context of what students are putting in terms of the money and their financial future just to get a degree. The We have an obligation to ensure that the stuff we're teaching them is in direct alignment to the best of our ability to what industry is needing. And I don't think that we've done that enough as a community. And I could point at certain disciplines that I think in particular I have done a terrible job with that. Um, and then others that have done an amazing job. But there's also this weird continuum. If we look at writing, I often think about AI is kind of looked at dualistically. It's like there was nothing and then there's AI. Well, I mean, we've got who okay, where how are we looking at that spectrum, the squiggly line in word processors that show us that, okay, we've misspelled something. Okay, well, is it okay to do that? To listen to that. Okay, well, what about the blue line now? That's just talking about a slight phrasing challenge problem. Maybe it's not grammatically correct. Well, is that okay to follow that? Okay, now let's keep going. What about the tools that our students were using and still use, but now with AI, like Grammarly,
yeah.
that just basically took that blue line and then expanded a little. You could be a little bit clearer if you just eliminated this adverb. Was that okay? And now, so it's not so dualistic. I think sometimes people look at it in terms of writing, and we have to think about what is what's appropriate in our discipline.
Yeah.
We could go down the rabbit hole there.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I think there is a point where the frog jumps out of the pan on the writing.
Mm,
Maybe it's just me being
yeah.
old or something, but like, I feel like
No, I
there
don't
is a
think so.
point where, because to me, writing is thinking, right? And so,
Yeah,
like, so
absolutely.
it's not just the output; it's the process. I mean, writing is a process, and I mean, you're writing a book right now. Like, there's nothing more self-loathing to me than writing a book. Like, I'm so excited, and then about 3 chapters in, I realize I'm just
Okay, just don't know. I don't know.
every day I'm
I
just
can
like,
do
oh my God, what have I signed up for? And then I just sign up for another book as soon as it's over, like a
it.
masochism. But
Well, and that was, I wanted to call this out with this chapter is kind of one of the things that I disagreed with, and I don't want to frame the argument as something other than what they're doing. So, but they they write somewhere that uh, one of the ways to kind of mitigate the writing AI problem is to take what students have done early on in the course as a as a baseline of their writer's voice. So this argument is grounded in a beautiful place, which is to know your students. Yes, of course, right? That's wonderful, 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 wonderful. The strategy they're encouraging folks to do is take that student's writing as a baseline, and thus later on in the course, if that baseline has it dramatically changed, then you need to have your antennae up that possibly they've used AI. I think that is absolutely the wrong approach. And that's grounded in having taught writers for years. And it's just, you said it yourself, like writing is thinking. If we're doing our job, the writing should be better. And then, when I'm learning writing, I would mimic good writers. Right. What was I reading? What was I listening to? And everything about my writer's voice would change over the duration of a course, maybe the duration of a month. And so that idea of using a student's as baseline as a means of getting at whether or not they've used AI, I just think that's the wrong approach.
Yeah, I mean,
I wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I mean, it gets to the next thing I wanted to ask you about from the chapter, which was, this was the most, of all the chapters I've read in this book, this was the most, they spent a lot of time going to great complex detail about ways to ward off academic misconduct, testing systems and ID systems and shuffling students into different rooms. And I just thought, like, I remember writing in the margins, I was just like, who has time for all of this? Like, right. I don't have time for all of this. And the next note I was writing was basically, what about trust? Like, what about, like, you want to, like, it's separate from AI, separate from learning objectives, well, directly. I really want to create a community in my classroom. Even if I have 215 students, I want them to be glad to come. I want them to be glad to see each other. I want them to be excited just to be in the room. Even if what I'm teaching is so dull, I want them to be happy to be there, because then they're more likely to learn. But if I start treating them like criminals, if I start doing some of the things they're suggesting, like, yes, I could absolutely say without any worry that my assessment was rock solid, but the students also hate me. Like, it's not really hate me is not right way to say it. The students we don't have a trust agreement between us. There's no relationship. Yeah. Like, basically,
you're not human anymore.
It just turns me into Jeremy Bentham. Now I'm Jeremy Bentham, and I'm just got the panopticon going, and they don't know if they're being watched or not. And so I just wanted to see, like, how do we secure the validity of our assessments without becoming Jeremy Bentham, basically? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think that whether I was teaching a class of 20 pre-service teachers at MU or teaching 250 something of social science students when I was faculty member in Scotland, that human to human approach, that community was vital. And again, nobody knows where this is gonna go and how that tech applies. But my first thought is it such a crazy idea to ask our students about these? It's like, look, this is what I'm trying to teach you, and this is what I think is going to help you, not just in the course, but more importantly, the industry that you're getting into. And I recognize that AI is here. It can be thrilling and scary. But I'm sure you see that this stuff that we're talking about is not serving you if you just use it. So let's come together and think about ways of mitigating this problem. I bet the students could come up with some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
That you and I couldn't talk about.
They know the technology often better than we do.
Oh yeah, and that's why I know the authors call this out of, like, don't get in an arms race with a student. Yeah. That's stupid. That's just why there's. I've historically, other folks could tell you this, I've historically had no patience whatsoever when I hear my fellow educators talk negatively about students.
Right.
Because and that was before AI, right? So this kind of us versus them idea, that's the wrong stuff. And it puts higher education always into a reacting mindset rather than proactive. So I think my first, fully recognizing that we're in this medium space, which is very frustrating for us all. My first is to ask students genuinely what they think. What do you want? So you're paying money to be here. Sure, I'm assuming it's not just to get a piece of paper after 4-something years. I'm assuming that you would like to maybe be engaged in what you're doing. There's something about this discipline that you think is cool. Let's start there. And I bet we could come up with some stuff. And it's then and only then would we talk about what the authors talk about, like lockdown browsers or assessment types. Surely AI detection, which I'm extraordinarily skeptical that is ever approach, regardless. So we could play with that idea if you'd like.
Yeah.
But I would talk with the students first and foremost.
The authors did bring up, it made me think, having the students suggest test questions, which was an interesting idea. I thought that would be it. Yeah. And they basically actually added the step of have the students, each one suggest like 3 questions, and then use AI to help improve the questions. And I thought that was an interesting relationship between student buy-in and using AI.
And that's an old school technique.
It is.
I mean, before AI, it was always having. I mean, it was a fun way of building community. I forget the study. What was it? But where the instructor asked the students to do that. They had, I think it was the instructor had already created exam questions, and then they asked the students to create exam questions. The students hadn't seen what the instructor did, and the students made much more rigorous exam questions than the faculty member. And so, and that just shows that I think, I think it was Doug Buell, maybe he's in like a literacy guy, and he had said there's nothing more engaging than comprehension. And so there's nothing more exciting as a learner when you are actually comprehending what's being said. And that's the danger of the cognitive offloading the authors are talking about. Mm-hmm. That if they do that to a certain extent, I mean, I don't know if they mentioned this or not, I don't recall, but it's the engagement motivation factors that's the real danger. So yeah, that having students create their own assessment system, that's a great technique. And like I said, I think that other stuff that is mentioned, lockdown browsers, I think that there's a great place for something like that if we could ever get the tech to work. I know that I've never seen it work properly. I'm sure that somebody has, but it's always just been a nightmare. Again, like if anybody could figure out, like if an institution could have a Faraday building, I know that sounds crazy, but to me that just like have a testing center that's wrapped in tinfoil or however that works. Maybe there's something to that. A little like it's a place where everyone knows tech need not enter. I don't know. I think that would be a cool thing to have.
I think that would make a great horror movie for some folks. Like,
right.
Imagine a place where your phone doesn't work. I'm picturing like the tunnel system on campus that, we never really see. I bet you internet's not great down there. I should go give my tests in these ancient sewage tunnels and electrical tunnels. That's great. Thanks, AI. Thank you. I hope you guys are making lots of money. Thanks.
All right, students. We're meeting in the tunnels this morning.
This is fine. Yeah. It's fine. It's going to be fine. Most of you are going to be fine, at least. I wanted to ask you about what advice would you give to the instructor who is trying to reassess their course? I think we might have already covered some of this, but to give it an opportunity for a square answer, just glancing it. But what advice would you give instructors who realizes that AI has catalyzed the need for them to reassess their learning objectives? Like, what advice would you give them?
Calm down. I would say calm down first and foremost. Yes, this is a scary time. I recognize that, but don't do what we do so often in academia, which is to just overreact and then do all of this stuff that we don't actually think first before we do it. Is kind of ready. What is it? Ready, shoot, aim. No, don't do that. Don't do that. I go back to first principles and I go to what are you trying to achieve in the course? And that is not a small question, because in order to answer it properly, we have to be in the right headspace. And the right headspace is one without ego. All of us got into higher ed and faculty and blah, 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 because we learned stuff and we worked hard and all of the, but yes, good. But some of those skills may not be as relevant as they were. Right? And so that's not our obligation as educators is not to teach the students the stuff that we learned. It's to help them understand how a disciplinary expert thinks and to try best to prepare them for whatever industries they're going into. And so the authors rightfully point out the great danger is the critical thinking piece. That's a good question. Like, how do you approach it that way? But I think that the advice I would give to a faculty member is try to forget everything that you've done in the past with your teaching and just go back to what you know about the people in your discipline. What are the skills that these students need to do? And maybe they are indeed having skills that, we talked opening as we opened this idea of that cognitive offloading. And, sometimes we need to be able to do a skill before we can offload that skill to do a bigger skill, right? So there's a reason why I don't hand my 8-year-old a calculator, right? Just like when I was going through my first graduate program, as heavily quantitative in its approach, we were doing multiple regression by hand. And if any of your listeners have done multiple regression by hand, that is a beast, right? That is crazy. But
I can't even tell you if I learned it or not. I know what I've taken 2 quantitative classes and I still don't know. Like, it was both.
Just imagine like the doing long division by hand, and so you get that kind of tail as it goes down the page, right? Now imagine that, I don't know, times 20 because of you are doing a number of different calculations just to get to the calculation so that you can make your calculation. And so with pages and pages, but I'm grateful they introduced that before we got into what a quantitative methods person would do, which is using statistical software, because I understand now what's going on behind it. But with that, I would say that, in education, we often use the term scaffold, right? Is the thing that a student can, let's say, stand on or climb on or whatever to get to another thing. Right. But what is often not taught is that there's a reason it's called scaffold. What is a scaffold on a building, right? It helps us build the building. Does the scaffold remain? No, it doesn't. It's a temporary thing. And so let's be honest, that's in some of our skills, we're simply teaching a vital scaffold that will ultimately, once no longer needed, will fade away. And so as we're talking about our course objectives and indeed our program outcomes, that's something to think about as well. So sometimes I don't see a lot of humility when asking some educators to think about what they're teaching in their courses and their programs. And I think we could all use a hefty dose of that.
So it starts with that. I guess once you have humility, once you forget and you try to start fresh with what am I trying to accomplish here, and you've identified what that is, I guess the next steps are identifying the appropriate assessments. I guess you think about how you want to teach the students this stuff, but also what are the appropriate assessments?
Yeah.
Has AI taken any assessments completely off? I think you kind of just answered this question with the scaffolding metaphor. I'm thinking about like whether or not AI has basically taken certain assessment tools completely off the table. And I guess it just comes down to what you're trying to accomplish.
It does. And I would, that's why I would kind of hesitate, because there are, say early course objectives that require assessments, and we want to assess frequently. That's good teaching and learning, that are perhaps irrelevant at higher levels of cognitive rigor. Sure. But nevertheless are important.
But the as you called it earlier, I think I wrote down the beige essay, the prompt, like write an essay about Shakespeare's Hamlet.
delving deeper into that topic can of course be powerful. And this is AI or not. Like this has been saying the same stuff in, say, writing, in writing in the disciplines for forever. Is that maybe it's not such a crazy idea to seriously think about how engaged your students will be in the assessments you choose.
It's true. I mean, that's absolutely,
You know?
because in my class, I use tests not because I feel like we have to have tests, because I feel like they're really good at measuring what they learned, but also
Yeah.
I feel like I have the students' complete attention before the test. Like it's a learning tool. Like they
Oh,
are
yeah.
like kind of, they're going to pay attention. Some of them in class, some are going to engage with the readings, blah, blah, blah. But like when it's test time, I have their complete attention for a few days. And like there's a lot of distractions, but most of them, well, more of them, ideally more of them would lock in. But it's a teaching tool is the point. Like the test is
Yeah.
actually a tool of learning itself too.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, that's great. And I'm not someone that kind of, I think that an ill-conceived argument that somehow tests or assessments are bad. No, ill-conceived, poorly crafted ones, yeah, those suck. Nobody likes those. But you can certainly make assessments that, as you say, both they act as an assessment tool and a learning tool. Um, my personal favorite, and this works regardless of AI. Of course, you got to put what's the skill that's behind here, but I love the RAFT assessment, which can be applied both through written communication and oral communication. The RAFT is a very simple idea. So it's an acronym, RAFT, and it's role. So we're giving our students a role that's not a student, which is great. So it's typically maybe a disciplinary expert or whatever. A is audience. I forget what study it was, but when they surveyed who students think they're writing to all the time, of course, it's the professor, right? They think about you. No, you've got to tweak that, make the audience something more authentic. F is for format. So we're not writing this MLA or APA paper that people frankly don't write outside of academia, right? And then the task. What is the task at hand? Typically something grounded in the kind of an authentic disciplinary exercise. And again, I think that's grounded usually in written communication, but I would push oral communication. How can you make that work? Those are very engaging, especially if you give some students some choice in the matter. You can pick this role, you can pick this audience or whatever. Again, it doesn't address directly the AI thing, you can say, but it can be a helpful tool.
So, if we haven't covered it already, I was curious about your work of doing assessment or of leading assessment for the university. How has AI changed the work that you do in leading the university's assessment efforts?
Yeah. So in addition to what I've been talking about of kind of let's use this as an opportunity to look at program outcomes and course objectives. A lot of it has focused on how do we, given AI, how do we ensure that what we're doing is going to be relevant? And you and I had a luncheon recently where I was kind of pitching some of the ideas that I recommended. And I recommended that, look, if we're gonna look at the skills that we're gonna teach our students, we can approach it a number of different ways. And one way I'm just encouraging is explicit. So by explicit, I mean you've got outcomes and course objectives, so program outcomes and course objectives that are explicitly calling AI out. So I use the example of, okay, at the end of this program, students should be able to design predictive models with AI tools to, say, forecast market trends. Okay, design predictive models using AI. Okay, well, that's obviously explicit, right? We're saying, look, AI is a thing. We're going to teach you throughout our courses how to use it in service of your discipline. Great. And sometimes an outcome, I think, is rightfully should be explicit. Then there's, of course, implicit. So this idea that we're not calling AI out. We're assuming it's say a tool. So we might see an outcome that's At the end of this program, students should synthesize financial data to recommend options for a startup company. So that might be something out of business. I said synthesize financial data. It's kind of assumed that perhaps I might use AI analysis tools for something like that. Okay, so explicit, implicit. But then there's what I think often I don't see. If we say we've got a problem with a skill, that we don't want students to offload this top skill to AI. We need them to be able to do this. Great. Use your outcome to identify that. So we might call this explicit negative. Let's say writing. At the end of our program, we want our students to be able to compose analytical essays that integrate evidence and original reasoning without reliance on AI tools. I have just explicitly called it out. This is what the skill that we need to be able to have our students to do. And it's explicitly saying without using AI. Why do I push this like a broken record all the time? Because once we got the outcome, now our assessments align accordingly if we do it right. Mm-hmm. Then we can start thinking, well, why are we having lockdown browsers, or why are we breaking a course assessment into different ways so that's very difficult or even annoying to try and use AI tools? Because our outcome says so. And then we can share that with our students, right? Look, our job as journalists, and I'm not proposing that J-School does something like this, though it'd be maybe you go for it, right? But if that is indeed a value to you all, great, good, put it in your outcomes and share it with your students. So that you're not, and that goes with the community stuff you were talking about earlier, right? I don't want to, it's not as us versus them, seeing students human to human. It's like, look, dear students, I want to help you. This is what we as your J-School faculty have said is very important to us, this outcome of being able to do this without reliance on AI tools. So everything we do in this particular course or in this particular sequence of courses or whatever is in service to that. So if you get annoyed, just know that it's coming from a loving place. We don't want you all getting screwed when you go into industry, right? And are there going to be some students that for whatever reason, they decide, sure, of course, but you're not going after them, right? They'll have to deal with that stuff and we wish them well. Eventually they're going to get caught. It's going to, and hopefully we can be there to support them. But I think a good chunk of the students will follow you. Like, oh, this is what Jared and his folks are saying is important. Okay, I'll do my best. So that's the kind of how I would approach it.
Yeah, because I think that's it seems obvious when we talk about it, but I think we tend to focus, I think I made that mistake all summer of just focusing on the assessment. All summer, yeah. What assessment am I going to use to avoid this problem? I really want a legitimate assessment of the students' learning, but what you're advocating is, whoa, that's the end of the story. Like, let's go back to the beginning of the movie, because the end will make more sense if you saw the beginning of the movie than it would if you just only watched the end of the movie. So the assessment is informed by what happened earlier in the story.
It's the most common approach when I'm talking with folks in assessment. Is always, there was this assessment when I was in grad school that was really, really cool, and I want to do that for my students. And then I come in and it's like, why? I'm sure it was cool.
It might work, it might not, but
it may work.
Yeah.
But why? It's the building is starting with the roof again. And that's so it by building it properly, it can mitigate a lot of the challenges that we have with picking, and this applies, by the way, for learning activities as well. So things that aren't necessarily graded, but the stuff that we are using to support the course objectives or the program outcomes.
Right.
Why are you having a lecture here as opposed to a discussion? Is it clearly aligned to that course objective? If it is, great. Maybe directed instruction like a lecture is required here. If we're doing this properly, we should be able to point at any assessment and see how it aligns to an objective and ultimately a program outcome. And you mentioned like a movie metaphor. I often say teaching shouldn't be a mystery novel. like a mystery movie, right? Students should know the ending at the beginning.
Right.
So don't just I would encourage my fellow educators, don't just do this in your head or in a faculty committee. Share it with your students, all of it, so that they can see where they're going to go. All the levels that you have in this video game, right? They know where they're going and why.
That makes good sense. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I'm sure you're busy. You've got a book to read. You've got another family member, I think, on the way. So thank you for taking some time. And it's been great talking to you.
Yeah, Jared. Yeah, it's fun. Thanks.